Hey guys, let's start with a pro-revenge story from 327 Nova. My cousin stole loads of jewelry, so I stole his inheritance. I do not speak lawyer, so please forgive me. Backstory. 25 years ago, my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my two cousins, who were both in their early 20s, alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were very wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of inheritance if a parent passes before the children reach age 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money. Straight out of a book of the Bible, within 6 years, he was back to living in a condo working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his officer salary and buying copious amounts of drugs. The next 4 years, my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Absolutely wretched woman. She saw my grandparents as payday and essentially baby, trapped my cousin thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years, they had 3 kids, so she is locked in tight. She is a nurse, and with 3 kids around, they always needed a little boost. Guess who they would always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always lent a hand. My father, mother, sister, and I got sick of it very quickly. My grandmother unfortunately passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favorite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this, so much so that whenever they came to visit and I was not home, they would send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors, so it couldn't be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far to place one of those little mechanical noisemakers in the cabinet in my room, the ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully, my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so, she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time, I was 18 and in the possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandfather has guns, but cannot aim and shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration. So when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need of self-defense arise. But should he see them out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the gremlins. One fateful day, I am out getting my grandfather food when I come home and my older cousin, his wife, and my grandfather are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox, but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it, as a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab. Figure out what it was too, load my gun and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house. But my cousin, who is a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave and hadn't arrested me yet, because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had won, or so he thought. The next day, I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me, and he apologized, but he thought it best I move out until things cool down, but once they do, I would be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I am still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad, as they had sealed payday with Grandpa. It was time to move on to the uncle. This persisted for a month or two. I wouldn't stand for it. Then came time for the will. My grandfather's lawyer read out the will to me. My father, mother, and sister in our home. Our two cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, per my grandparents' requests. Then the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying, if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father is supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me, from my grandparents, as he is the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it right. It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy bastard of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house ASAP. Determined to snatch up as much as he could, a handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyways, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything. Formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen wondering why it was all there, when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up, which was true. But there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed, so he would f*** himself over. It's worth noting that between the 18 years from my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over, so my cousin felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, his younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all and is still weeping over Grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes that made him contemplate his sanity. Over greed. My cousin's bitch of a wife apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from him in nearly 6 years as he is all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and on this particular part of the story, it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on. But honestly, I would rather have my grandparents. Leave comments if you want the other part of the story, but it's not really a revenge story. Here are some top comments on the post. The first one is from Tom is awesome. Imagining your cousin walking into the kitchen with that box of jewelry and seeing everyone standing there makes me smile so much. I'm sorry you weren't able to live with your grandfather in his last moments, but it sounds like he knew what was going on. You're lucky to have had such a close relationship with him. Transcendental Rug replies to Tom is awesome. That, and I love the thought that if he wasn't so greedy, he could have gotten out of there with a shoebox or 2 full of jewelry before anyone ever arrived. Still a hefty payday and they would have kept their inheritance. But he just had to keep going back for more and more until he got caught. Breath of the Office replies to Transcendental Rug on Tom is awesome's comment. Well, he probably thought he could get away with 4, so why stop at just 2? But let's think about the value. OP said a handful would be enough to send the kids to college. Let's assume some exaggeration, and that it would be enough for one kid's college. A shoebox's worth would be more than enough for all 3 kids. Now, if this is the US, then that would be hundreds of thousands per shoebox. We can rule out most EU countries since college tuition is mostly free. In my country, it isn't free, but still quite heavily subsidized. For 3 kids if they are local, That would run you about $100K without any further subsidy total. That's still $100K a shoebox. Now for most people, an extra $400K is a lot. If it's the US, that's a few million, and lesser in countries with cheaper education. I don't know what jewelry would be that expensive still, but greed is one hell of a motivator. The next comment is from Once I Was 1.5. Wow, what a greedy a hole your cousin is. Would love to hear the other part. OP replies to Once I Was 1.5. Nah, so the other part consists of my dad's cousin, the son of my grandfather's brother, Joseph, who is the same age as my dad. For decades, my dad, my grandfather, and Joseph ran my grandfather's business in tandem. At the time of my grandfather's death, my dad owned 50% of the business with my grandpa owning the other 50%. When he passed, the will stated that my dad would receive half of my grandpa's share and Joseph would get the other half, ending with 75% to my dad and 25% to Joseph. Joseph married this Swedish woman whose family was filthy rich, far wealthier than my own family. Joseph wanted to buy out my dad and the company using his wife's fortune. So he did. Joseph tried to pay my dad into an account in my dad's name that was tied to the business, which would be classified as company property once he had 100% ownership, essentially recycling the money back to himself, getting the business for free. It was something along those lines, very similar. Like I said, I don't speak this type of business law. This would have left the entire family dead in the water as several years ago. My grandparents' house was tied into the business as a liquidable asset should the company experience hardship. So the house would have been his and everything inside, except for things that were named. My dad was halfway through signing documents when he caught this and called it off, but Joseph tried to take my dad to court since he signed about half the documents. My dad probably would have lost, to be honest, but he claimed fraud on some technicality in the documents and was reinstated and given a double jeopardy type immunity from Joseph. He hired a PI and found out that Joseph had like $20 to his name on all accounts to him and reported him to the IRS. And they believe he has laundered millions out of the US to his wife's family, and the FBI has been on the case for a while. Not so much revenge, but a whole bunch of BS where we almost lost a bunch of stuff to a snake in our garden. It was a very clever revenge that OP inflicted on his cousin. He set a trap by telling his cousin that their late grandmother's valuable jewelry would be donated. Greed is always present. OP's cousin rushed to their grandparents' house and tried to steal the jewelry but was caught red-handed. According to the clause in the will that stated if he tried to take more than his share, he would lose his right to inheritance. Due to this clause, OP's cousin had to forfeit his entire inheritance. It was a satisfying revenge on the greedy cousin. Let's now jump to another very interesting pro-revenge story. It is from eGrant03. Bully me into selling you my car. You pissed off the wrong mama bear. TLDR at the bottom. Sorry in advance for how long it is and spelling issues. It's a good story though. So about 8 years ago, I'm selling a used car. Engine light was on, the AC needed recharging, and the fuel pump or something was out. So I go to my local, trusted sales site. Ad goes up with a few pictures and the words, I work weird hours, so I may not be able to accept a phone call. Please only text me. Yay to working swings and midnights, right? That was actually college classes, but same thing for me. So a few days in, I get a pretty standard text. Hi, I'm Matt. Is your car still for sale? Matt isn't his real name, but you get the idea. So text back that it is. A few standard texts about price. Why is the engine light on? Who did you get the quote from? I listed an approximate price on the repairs as quoted from my trusted mechanic, and whatnot go back and forth. The next day, I get a text from him saying, are you going to take all your shit out of the car before you sell it to me, or is that my job? Unwarranted hostility? Really? WTF. Man! He's not the only interested party, so I text him back. I'm not selling the car to you, so don't worry about it. I never said I would sell it to him. He never asked if he was the only interested party, and others were arranging test drives already. I didn't need him and his less than full price, partial commitment. And the shit he was complaining about is 3 textbooks and a bag I keep clothes in. 4 things. This guy didn't like to take no for an answer and starts calling and texting about how my car's paint is peeling. True, but the pics and description said so. And how dare I ask so much, $1,000, for a piece of Eshot car. I started replying for a time, telling him he wasn't going to get the car, that I had other interested buyers so he didn't need to worry about it, etc. Then things got personal. This site gave you the option to link to Facebook so you could post at both places at the same time. So I had. I didn't have my privacy settings turned down as it was still early into Facebook's absolute reign. And I actually trusted them at the time. Silly me, I know. I hadn't anticipated that he would be able to find my info through the website's post and find my name, my location, pictures of my kid, my mother-in-law's obit, etc. Surprise me, he did. He starts text me about how I should be ashamed of myself for saying no to him, a muscular dude, and me being a quite round female. He included a picture in one text, and he wasn't the muscular-built man he claimed to be. He looked like a beanpole with 2 AB muscles, so WTF, dude? He asked me if I even knew everything about cars or if I made the post while on my period so I didn't know what I was talking about. He texted that I should be lucky I was already married, or else he would come to my house and show me how a real man handles a little. He got close but didn't have an address, and the way my address pulls up on GPS, he never would find my apartment, thankfully. Small side info. Since I was in college at the time and needed a more flexible schedule, I worked as a school crossing guard. Every 2 weeks or so, we'd go in to sign our time cards in order to get paid. This crossing guard gig was a hire, though my local PD. Not all crossing guard gigs are the same, but this one was. During one of these visits into the office, I was using my phone while I was waiting for my boss to get to me, my name being low in the alphabet. I hadn't yet blocked the dude as it hadn't been long since this started, and I was hoping it would fizzle on its own. I didn't check my phone in class, choosing to turn it off to avoid adding on it the entire day, and I was often flooded with several hours of texts all at once. What I saw on my phone drove me over the cliff. He started texting about pictures I had posted on Facebook about my 8 or 7-year-old son. He had just majorly crossed the line. The cleanest version of his texts included things like, "Your kid is just as ugly as you are. I hope you don't plan on him leaving home to get a wife anytime soon." And how a smudge of dirt on his face from a day at the zoo looked like I beat him. "I didn't sell you a car and you're taking out your rage by threatening to rape me and accusing me of beating my kid? Oh, hell no." Apparently, I was loud when I said what I did because my boss stepped right over to me next and asked what was wrong. Great person. 10-10. Would boss again. I told her that I was getting this abusive texts from a rando that tried to buy my car. I told her I was about to erase the texts and block him, but she's like, "No. Wait, don't do that. Let me see your phone." So happy I didn't delete them, because this next part still makes my heart sore. I offer and she takes my phone, reading all the sick and vile things he texted to me. She tells me to wait until she's cleared the lobby of the other crossing guards, so I do. She then tells me to follow her behind the security doors at the PD station, still having my phone. I don't know what's happening, but I liked and trusted her, so I do. I follow her back to her office where she works on her computer, referring my phone on occasion. She asks if all I have is the phone number or if I got his name too. I tell her I only got a first name and scroll to the text where he introduced himself. A semi-uncomfortable amount of time later, she hands back my phone. Something to mention, my boss isn't just administrative. I didn't know it at the time, but she's a full-on lieutenant in the local PD. She came up the ranks from patrol, moving to a position where she exclusively investigated child, elder, disabled abuse complaints before moving into her current desk position. Needless to say, she didn't take people threatening harm to kids lightly. Because I hadn't blocked the number, I still had the text messages with the dude's name, and she had used it to cross-search him and the phone number. Long story short, she knew exactly who he was. She says not to worry, but don't delete or respond to his texts anymore. She had it. If it got worse, I should call her or 911 as appropriate right away. Unconcerned and happy she had the situation in hand, I leave and go to class. When I'm back to the office to sign my next time card, 2 weeks later, I had several unread texts from the guy. I had filtered them so I didn't see them pop up and hadn't read them. I had sold the car for full asking price and all but forgotten the entire situation. My boss tells me to wait for her again as she had something else for me to sign, and I again return to her office. She briefly explains what she had for me, what an actionable complaint that she needed me to sign from my issue 2 weeks ago. I remember everything all over again. She must see my face because she tells me not to worry and that she can tell me what's going on more after I actually sign the form. So I do. Dear Reddit, this is the best situation anyone could have asked for. The phone number tied to many people as the provider was known for cheap cell service for those that were desperate for a way to contact people/services/employment. But with the name Matt, again, fake name, she was able to find out who was messing with me. She then got a driver's license, which led to an address, which led to a police report for possible domestic violence. Fall down the rabbit hole some more, and you find out that this dude had 5 kids by 4 women, and he was in arrears on his child support to them all. Hadn't been paying for 10 plus years, and it was in the neighborhood of 30 to 50K, if memory serves. But he somehow, just 2 weeks ago, requested a title transfer for a new-to-him quite fancy old car. I don't remember the kind, but think high-end car show and massive insurance premiums. Being so far in arrears meant that my boss was able to place a seizure order on the car so it could be sold to pay back the child support. One of the baby mamas live in a state where fleeing child support meant you could have a warrant issued for your arrest. When she called the interested parties in that state to see if they wanted her to execute the arrest warrant, they said yes with much haste. That was a funny turn of phrase, so I always remembered it. One conversation later, and my boss was able to determine that he was using the brother's social security number on his employment forms to avoid child support garnishments. This is all sorts of illegal. So she notified the guy's HR department so it could be corrected. They informed her he would be fired for fraudulently submitting false documents. She then told me that about 4 days ago, she had executed the warrant on the dude for felony child abandonment, and that the state he was to be held for was already en route to pick him up. It carried an 8 to 12-year sentence, and he still had to pay his back child support. I could have dealt with the comment, I could have dealt with the not taking no for an answer, even dealt with the cyberstalking a little. But when your twisted mind okays you to bring my kid into the picture, you done crossed the line. If you would have stopped at no, you wouldn't be in jail right now. TLDR. Guy trying to buy my car makes a rude comment to me so I won't sell to him. He can't take no for an answer, so he cyberstalks me and threatens my young child. Doesn't realize my boss is a lieutenant in the local PD. Ends up getting a high-end car repoed for 50K-ish in back child support. He now has a felony record and is currently sitting in jail. Edit. Holy awards. Batman. Thank you so much. My boss really was the best. I cried when I left that job. She retired a few years back, and I sent her a huge cake. She remembered me and called to thank me. She was fantastic and never gave me a reason to doubt her support. Edit 2, platinum and gold, first time getting either. Holy crap, thank you. It was a perfect revenge, taking the bully to jail. It was actually OP's boss's revenge on the bully. A small mistake by him led to the revelation of all his past cases, and he lost his job. Now he is serving time in jail. It was a really satisfying revenge.